Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. This time, we're taking a look at Max Weber's The Scholar and the Politician.
A classic.
It is, and it's interesting. It's a collection of lectures, but it's really anything but dry, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
Weber gets into some seriously thought-provoking stuff about, like, knowledge and power, how we even make sense of the world.
Yeah, and what I think is so fascinating about this work is that even though it was written over a century ago, it feels like incredibly relevant to the things we are struggling with today.
Right, like it's aged so well.
It has this amazing staying power, and I think part of that is because Weber himself was grappling with such a tumultuous period in history, you know, post-World War I Germany, trying to rebuild, questioning everything. Those lectures aren't just like abstract theories. They're coming from a very personal place, I think.
Yeah, totally. It's like he's wrestling with these big ideas, not just for his audience, but for himself, too.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really struck me was this idea of the disenchantment of the world,
right,
which is, what is that? Can you maybe explain that a little bit? Because it sounds kind of depressing at first.
Yeah. So Weber argues that as we become more rational, more scientific in our thinking, we kind of lose something along the way, like almost like the magic fades a bit.
Okay, yeah, I see that. I get that.
He uses this example. I believe it's a modern man on a tram who's completely reliant on this tram, but clueless about how it works, the mechanics of it.
Right.
Compared to, say, someone living in a more, quote unquote, primitive society who might have a very deep understanding of their tools and their connection to survival.
That's such a vivid image.
Yeah.
And it made me think about how much we just take for granted today, right?
Yeah.
Like, I use my smartphone constantly.
Of course.
But I have no idea how it actually functions.
Yeah.
And is that kind of like what Weber means by disenchantment?
Exactly.
This feeling of being disconnected from the things we depend on.
Yeah, and it's not just about technology either. He's talking about a broader shift in how we relate to the world, where everything becomes systematized, rationalized, but maybe we lose sight of the bigger picture.
Right.
Or the deeper meaning behind things.
I see. So it's like this, I guess like a spiritual or philosophical disconnect even.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it.
Okay. Interesting. And I guess this kind of leads to the question of the scholar's role in all of this, right?
Absolutely.
Like, can academics ever truly be value-free in their pursuit of knowledge?
It's a really challenging question.
I mean, even choosing what to study, what questions to ask, that already involves some kind of value judgment, doesn't it?
Yeah, so this is something that Weber really wrestled with. He uses the example of judging the beauty of Indian temples, like solely by Greek standards.
Interesting.
It highlights how our own values, our background, inevitably shape how we see and interpret the world, even when we're striving for this objectivity, you know?
It's like that saying, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. Which is a pretty humbling thought, especially for someone who spends their life trying to understand things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that's a great point. And this kind of tension between personal values and objective knowledge, I think this kind of plays right into Weber's discussion of politics too, right?
It does, yeah, absolutely.
He introduces these two contrasting ideas, the ethic of conviction and the ethic of responsibility. What are those?
Okay, so think about it this way.
Okay.
I mean, we all want to act on our beliefs, right? To fight for what we think is right. But what happens when that clashes with the messy realities of the world?
Yeah.
When our conventions lead to unintended consequences.
Right.
That's kind of the heart of the dilemma that Weber's getting at.
Okay.
So he uses the example of a union leader who's deeply committed to his cause and calls for a strike despite warnings about the negative impact it might have. So it's that unwavering commitment to an ideal, even if it leads to harm, that he calls the ethic of conviction.
So it's like following your heart no matter what.
Yeah.
Which can be admirable, but also potentially reckless.
Exactly.
Okay. So where does the ethic of responsibility come in then?
It's the counterpoint. So it's about weighing the potential consequences of your actions, being accountable for the impacts that you have on the world, not just clinging to your ideals, but being willing to make tough choices.
Okay.
Even compromises, you know, for the greater good.
So in the case of the union leader, the ethic of responsibility might mean choosing a different course of action, even if it doesn't fully satisfy their convictions, if it ultimately benefits the people they represent.
Exactly. And I think this is important because this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate.
Right.
It's a tension that we all face in our own lives.
Right.
trying to balance our ideals with the practical demands of making a difference in the world.
Totally. And it's like, how do we stay true to our values while also being effective in a world that often feels driven by power struggles and competing agendas? And this is where Weber's analysis of the rise of professional politicians comes into play, right? Like how these ideas play out in these structures of power.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's dive into that.
Okay. Yeah, so Weber saw this shift happening in his time, a move from what he called the rule of notables to these powerful party machines.
Party machines, okay.
Yeah, and it makes sense when you think about it. How do you manage a large, complex society?
Right.
You need structures, you need organization.
Yeah.
But that very process can create a distance between the people in power and those they represent.
Okay, but isn't that kind of inevitable, though? Like, as societies grow, you need more specialized roles, more complex systems.
Yeah.
Doesn't that naturally lead to a more, like, bureaucratic, less personal form of politics?
That's the trade-off that Weber's really grappling with, and he uses this example of the caucus system in 19th century England. It streamlined things, sure, but it also contributed to what he called this loss of soul in politics.
Loss of soul, what does that even mean?
It's like this draining of passion conviction, a sense of personal connection to the work of governing. He even talks about Gladstone, this incredibly charismatic leader, becoming a kind of plebiscitary Caesar, riding the wave of this new party structure.
So it's like, even a leader who might start out with strong convictions, a genuine desire to serve the people, they can get caught up in this machine.
Yeah.
And they end up playing the game, prioritizing party loyalty over maybe their own conscience or the true needs of their constituents.
That's the danger that Weber highlights. And, it's even more pronounced today, right?
Oh, for sure.
Think about how much emphasis is placed on party unity, towing the line,
Right.
It can make it really difficult for politicians to speak out against their own party, even when they see something wrong.
It's almost like the system itself rewards conformity, playing it safe.
Yeah.
Which doesn't exactly encourage bold leadership or taking a stand on principle. But getting back to this loss of soul idea, does Weber offer any way out of this dilemma? Or is he just saying like, hey, this is the inevitable downside of modern politics, get used to it?
He's definitely not offering easy answers, but I wouldn't say he's just throwing up his hands in despair.
Okay.
He does suggest that individuals, even within these large impersonal systems, can still make choices that matter, you know? It goes back to that tension between the ethic of conviction and the ethic of responsibility.
Okay, so even in a world of political maneuvering and party agendas, there's still room for personal integrity, for trying to make ethical choices.
Absolutely.
But how do we actually do that? How do we apply those concepts to our own lives, our own decisions, whether we're talking about politics or just navigating our everyday world?
I think it starts with being aware of the forces at play, the structures that shape our choices.
Okay.
Recognizing that disenchantment isn't just something that happens out there in the world. It can affect our own thinking, too. We can become so focused on the means, the processes, that we lose sight of the ends, the values that truly matter to us.
So like in my own life, that might mean checking in with myself, asking, am I just going through the motions here? Or am I acting in a way that aligns with my core beliefs, even if it's uncomfortable or inconvenient?
Exactly. It's about being intentional, making conscious choices rather than just getting swept along by the current,
Yeah.
And it's about remembering that every decision, even the seemingly small ones, has an ethical dimension.
Right.
We're always shaping the world, even in subtle ways, through our actions.
I love that it's empowering, actually.
Yeah.
Like, even if we feel small or insignificant in the face of these large systems, we still have agency.
We do.
But it also feels really challenging. Like, how do we know what the right choice even is?
Right.
Especially in situations where there's no clear-cut answer, where different values are in conflict.
That's the essence of ethical decision-making, Weber would say.
Okay.
It's not about finding some prepackaged solution or following a set of rules. It's about grappling with those dilemmas, weighing the potential consequences, and then making the choice that you can live with, even if it involves difficult compromises.
Which sounds a lot like leadership, actually.
It is.
And speaking of leadership, one of the things I found most thought-provoking in Weber's work was his distinction between the different types of political legitimacy, traditional, rational, legal, and charismatic.
Okay.
What do those even mean in a practical sense?
Think about it like this. Why do we accept the authority of certain people or institutions?
Okay.
Sometimes it's based on traditional, long-standing customs, the way things have always been done, like inheriting a title or a role.
Okay, so that's traditional legitimacy. What about rational legal? That sounds very well bureaucratic.
It is. It's the kind of legitimacy that comes from rules, laws, procedures. We follow orders from our boss because they have a position of authority within the organizational structure.
Right.
We obey traffic laws because we believe in the system of rules that governs society.
Makes sense. And charismatic legitimacy.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit more exciting.
Yeah.
Is this where we get into those larger-than-life figures who inspire people to follow them?
Yes. It's about personality charm. The ability to connect with people on an emotional level, to inspire them with a vision. Think about historical figures like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
They weren't just following rules, they were challenging the existing order, motivating people through their words and actions.
So these different types of legitimacy are kind of like different sources of power, different ways that people gain influence and get others to follow them.
Exactly.
But how does this all play into Weber's concerns about the loss of soul in politics?
Yeah.
Does he see one type of legitimacy as better or worse than the others?
He's not so much making a value judgment as observing how these different types of legitimacy are playing out in the modern world. He sees the rise of rational legal authority, the dominance of bureaucratic systems as kind of an inevitable consequence of modernization.
Right.
But he also worries about what gets lost in the process, the passion, the inspiration, the sense of connection that can come from traditional or charismatic forms of leadership.
It's like that old saying, the heart wants what it wants, right?
Yeah.
Even in a world that's increasingly driven by logic and efficiency, we still crave meaning, purpose, connection.
We do.
And maybe that's where the ethic of conviction comes in, even in the realm of politics. Like, even if the system is pushing us towards conformity and playing it safe, there's still a role for individuals who are willing to stand up for what they believe in, to risk rocking the boat a little bit.
That's a great insight, and it leads us to one of the most controversial parts of Weber's work, his lecture on science as a vocation.
Okay.
It's where he really digs into the challenges of being both a passionate individual and a rigorous scholar, someone committed to objective truth.
Oh, yeah. This is where he talks about academics needing to leave their personal convictions at the door when they're teaching. Right.
Exactly.
Which always seemed a bit unrealistic to me. I mean, we're all human. We all have biases, passions.
Yeah. Of course.
How can you just completely separate those from your work?
That's the million-dollar question. And Weber acknowledges that complete value neutrality is probably impossible.
Okay.
But he still sees it as something to strive for, especially in the realm of academia.
So it's more about being aware of your biases, trying to be as objective as possible when you're presenting information or analyzing data, like not using your platform to push a personal agenda or indoctrinate students.
Exactly. For Weber, the scholar's role is to present the facts, analyze different perspectives, and then equip students with the critical thinking skills to form their own conclusions.
Okay.
It's about fostering a spirit of inquiry, not imposing a specific worldview.
Which feels especially important today in a world where information overload and echo chambers can make it really hard to know what to believe or who to trust.
Absolutely.
But if Weber is so insistent on objectivity in academia, how does he reconcile that with his own very personal struggles? The yearning for meaning that we see in his writing, like, isn't that a kind of conviction too?
Great point. You've hit on the core tension in Weber's thinking,
Yeah.
He's deeply aware of the limits of rationality, the fact that science can't answer all of our questions, especially the big ones about meaning and purpose.
Right.
But he also sees a real value in striving for objectivity, in trying to understand the world as clearly as possible, even if it means acknowledging that some things will always remain beyond our grasp.
So it's like he's drawing a line between the realm of facts and logic, where science excels, and the realm of values and belief, where each individual has to find their own way.
Yes, and this brings us back to the title of his lecture collection, The Scholar and the Politician.
Right.
He sees these as two distinct vocations, each requiring a different set of skills and ethical commitments.
Okay.
The scholar is called to a life of intellectual rigor, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake.
Right.
The politician, on the other hand, has to operate in the messy world of power, compromise, making decisions that impact the lives of others.
And it feels like those two worlds are often in tension, right?
They are.
We see scholars who get involved in politics sometimes blurring the lines between their academic work and their personal convictions.
Yeah.
And we see politicians who try to use quote-unquote science to justify their policies, even when the evidence is shaky or incomplete.
For sure.
So how do we navigate that tricky terrain?
Weber doesn't offer a simple answer, but he does urge us to be aware of the potential pitfalls.
Okay.
He cautions against scholars who abandon their commitment to objectivity to become political activists, and he's equally skeptical of politicians who cloak their ideologies in the language of scientific authority. He believes that both spheres are essential for a healthy society, but they need to operate with a clear understanding of their distinct roles and limitations.
It's like he's calling for a kind of intellectual honesty and humility in both realms, right?
Yeah.
Scholars should be rigorous in their pursuit of knowledge, but also acknowledge the limits of their own perspective.
Yeah.
And politicians should be transparent about the values that inform their decisions, recognizing that science doesn't offer a simple roadmap for governing complex human societies.
That's a fantastic summary, and it highlights the enduring relevance of Weber's work for anyone navigating the complexities of knowledge, power, and personal values in our world today.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the disenchantment of the world to the challenges of ethical decision-making, the rise of professional politicians, and the tension between the scholar and the politician.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this part of the dive, I'm curious what you think is the most surprising or even controversial aspect of Weber's work. What really made you stop and think?
You know, for me, it's how Weber seems to both embrace and mourn the disenchantment of the world. Like, he sees the value of reason, of science. But he also acknowledges what gets lost when we view the world solely through that lens. The mystery, the sense of wonder, the connection to something larger than ourselves.
It's like he's both fascinated by and a bit terrified of the modern world he's helping to analyze, which, honestly, I can relate to.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, where does he go from there? Does he offer any solutions, or is he just kind of leaving us with this bleak sense that the magic is gone and we're stuck in this, like, iron cage of rationality?
Well, he doesn't offer any easy solutions, that's for sure. But I wouldn't say he's completely pessimistic. He does point to some potential paths forward, ways to navigate this disenchanted world without losing sight of what makes us human.
Okay, I'm all ears. What does Weber prescribe for our modern malaise?
Well, he puts a lot of emphasis on the importance of strong leadership, not just in politics, but in all spheres of life. He believes that we need individuals who can inspire us, who can articulate a vision for the future that goes beyond just, efficiency and productivity.
So not just managers, but leaders.
Exactly.
People who can connect with us on an emotional level, who can motivate us to strive for something more than just the bottom line.
Exactly. And he even suggests that democracies might benefit from having a directly elected executive, someone with a clear mandate from the people, less beholding to the internal machinations of political parties. He calls this the plebiscitary leader.
Interesting. It's like he's trying to find a way to combine the efficiency of modern systems with the passion and vision of a more charismatic form of leadership.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that be risky too? I mean, couldn't it lead to demagoguery, to people being swayed by emotion rather than reason?
It's definitely a balancing act. And Weber acknowledges those risks, but he also sees it as a necessary experiment, a way to reinvigorate democracy in a world where the old structures are struggling to keep up with the complexities of modern life.
So it's like he's saying we need to find ways to make democracy more responsive, more engaging, even if it means trying something new, something that might seem a bit radical.
That's the gist of it. He's not advocating for a specific ideology or political program. He's more interested in creating a space for critical thinking, for challenging our assumptions about how power works and how we can create a better future.
And maybe that's the most valuable lesson we can take from Weber, even a century later. This idea that we're not just passive observers of the world, we're active participants. We have choices to make, both individually and collectively, about how we want to live, how we want to organize ourselves, what values we want to prioritize.
Absolutely. And those choices matter. Even if we feel small or insignificant in the face of these large systems, our actions have ripple effects. We can choose to embrace the disenchantment of the world, to become cynical or apathetic, or we can choose to resist it, to seek out meaning and purpose, to connect with others who share our values, and to work towards creating a world that's more just, more humane, more fulfilling.
It's like Weber is giving us this toolkit, this set of concepts and ideas to help us navigate the complexities of modern life. And it's up to us to use those tools wisely, to make choices that align with our deepest convictions and our sense of responsibility to the world around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Engaging with Weber, even all these years later, is a powerful reminder that the world is what we make it. We're not just passengers on this tram ride. We're the ones who decide where it's going.
And on that note, we encourage you to continue your own deep dive into Weber's ideas. Challenge yourself to see the world through a new lens, to ask the tough questions, and to find your own path to meaning and purpose in this complex and ever-changing world. Thanks for joining us.